Such a cruel weapon in this civil war. Americans have no idea, Alex. They couldn't possibly. Sometimes the Janjaweed will break a woman's legs first, so she can't possibly escape, and will be an invalid for the rest of her life. They like to flog victims, to break fingers one by one, to pull out fingernails. Adan said in a voice that barely got above a whisper. Even some of the peacekeepers are guilty of rape, and of using the refugees as prostitutes. What's worse, the government of Sudan is behind much of it. You won't believe what you will see here, Alex. I want to see it, I told her. I made a promise to a man in Sierra Leone that I would tell Americans what was happening here. Chapter 80. This is Kalma. She pointed at a yellow triangle on the map. It's one of the largest camps in Darfur. I'd wager that the tiger knows it well. Everyone around here does. What are the other colors? I asked. There were more than 100 camps in all, Adan explained. Green meant inaccessible during rainy season, and blue was closed to non-military aid organizations, based on current fighting conditions. Kalma's yellow meant open. That's where we would start our tiger hunt. And these? I ran a finger over a line of red flame icons. There were dozens of them. Adan sighed before answering my question. Red is for villages that are confirmed destroyed. The Janjaweed burn everything they can. Food stores, livestock. They put human and animal carcasses down the wells, too. Anything to ensure that no one comes back. In Arabic, Janjaweed means man with a gun on horseback. These were the Arab militias, widely believed to be supported by the current government in a vicious campaign to make life as unsafe as possible for black Africans in the region. An unthinkable 2 million people had already fled their homes, and more than 200,000 had died. 200,000 that we knew of. It was Rwanda all over again. In fact, it was worse. This time the whole world was watching and doing almost nothing to help. I looked out my porthole window at the Sahel landscape, 12,000 feet below. It was actually quite beautiful from up here. No civil war, no genocide, no corruption. Just an endless, peaceful stretch of tan, sculpted earth. Which was a lie, of course. A beautiful, very diabolical lie. Because we were about to land in hell. Chapter 81. At the base in Niala, we secured a ride out to the Kalma camp with a 5-truck convoy carrying sacks of grain and crates of F-75 and F-100 baby formula. Adan seemed to know everyone here, and I found it interesting to watch her work. Her gracious smile, not her attractiveness, seemed to be her secret. I saw it succeed again and again with people who were overworked and stressed to their limits. Camp seemed like the wrong word once I actually saw Kalma. Yes, there were tents and lean-tos and stick straw huts, but they stretched for miles and miles. 150,000 people lived here. That's a city. And one that was overflowing with unbearable suffering and heartbreak and death by everything from Janjaweed attacks to dysentery to childbirth without drugs and usually without a doctor or midwife. Around the camp's center were some signs of permanence, at least. A small open-air school was in session, and there were a few walled buildings with corrugated tin roofs where limited food supplies were still available. Adan knew exactly where we should go first. She took me to the United Nations Commission on Refugees tent, where a young soldier agreed to do some translating for us, although many of the refugees knew bits of English. The soldier's name was Emmanuel, and he had the same kind of sinewy height, dark skin, and deep-set eyes I'd seen on many of the so-called lost boys who had emigrated to D.C. over the years. Emmanuel spoke English, Arabic, and Dinka.
Most of the people here are fur,
he told us as we started down a long dirt avenue.
And 80% are abused women.
Most of their men are dead, or looking for work or resettlement," added Adan. "This is the most vulnerable city in the world, Alex. No exception. You will find out for yourself." It was easy to see what Adan and Emmanuel were talking about. Most of the people we found to speak with were women who were working outside their shelters. They reminded me of Moses and his friends because of how eager they were to share their terrible stories with someone from the outside. One woman, Medina, cried as she wove a straw mat and told us about coming to Kalma. The Janjaweed had destroyed her village and killed and mutilated her husband, her mother, and father. Most of her neighbors and friends were burned alive in their huts. Medina had arrived with 3 children and literally nothing else. Tragically, all 3 of her children had died at the camp. The sleeping mats she made were in demand because of duda worms, which came out of the ground at night and burrowed into the refugee's skin. Whatever she earned went toward onions and grain, though she hoped to have enough to buy a patch of cloth one day. She'd been wearing the same tuab since she'd gotten here. "When was that?" Adan asked. 3 years ago, was Medina's sad answer. "One for each of my children." Chapter 82. "I haven't lost sight of your tiger," Adan said as we trudged along. "He recruits boys here. It's easy for him." "You were right about the horror, Adan," I told her. I was eager to speak with people in as many sectors of the camp as possible, but when we came to one of the few medical tents, I had to stop again. I had never seen such a bewildering sight in my entire life. The tent was overflowing with sick and dying patients, 2 and more to a cot. Bodies were jigsaw puzzled into every available space. To make matters worse, long lines extended outside, at least 300 very sick women and children waiting for treatment, or for a better place to die. "Sadly, there's little to be done to stop their suffering," Adan told me. "Medication is scarce, much of it stolen before it can get here. There is starvation, pneumonia, malaria. Even diarrhea can be fatal. And with the water and sanitation problems, there is no end to it." I saw 1 doctor and 2 volunteer nurses. That was it. The entire hospital staff for thousands of very sick people. "This is what they call the second phase of the crisis," Adan went on. "More people dying inside the camps than outside. Thousands. Every single day, Alex. I told you that it was horrifying." "You understated," I said. "This is unimaginable. All these people. The children." I knelt down by a little girl in one of the few beds. Her eyes were clouded and looked unreal. I brushed away a buzzing cluster of black flies gathered at her ear. "How do you say, 'God be with you'?" I asked Emmanuel.
Allah ma'ak.
I said it to the tiny girl, though I don't know if she heard me. Allah ma'ak. Somewhere along the way today, I'd stepped away from a terrible, terrible murder investigation and into an unbelievable Holocaust. How was this possible in our world? Thousands dying like this every day? Adan put a hand on my shoulder. "Alex, are you ready to go? We should move on. You are here for the tiger, not for this. There's nothing you can do about this." I could hear in her voice that she'd seen all this before, many times, probably. "Not yet," I said. "What needs doing around here?" "Anything." Emmanuel's quick answer was not what I expected.
That depends. Can either of you handle a rifle?
Chapter 83. For the next few minutes, Adan explained what should have been obvious to me, that the simple act of gathering firewood was one of the most dangerous parts of life at Kalma. Janjaweed patrols were always present in the desert, and not far from the camp. Anyone venturing out took the risk of being raped, shot to death, or both. The wood gatherers, desperate women and their children, depended on AU escorts when they could get them, Mostly, though, they were forced to take their chances alone. No firewood meant no way to feed your family. Emmanuel secured me an older model M16, which had been retrofitted with a decent scope.
Don't hesitate to fire, because I promise you, the Janjaweed will not. They are skilled fighters, even while riding on horses or camels.
I won't hesitate, I promised, and I felt Adan grab hold of my elbow, then let go. "You're sure about this, Alex?" she asked. "You want to get involved?" "I'm sure." An hour or so later, we set out with an intrepid group of 24 women wood-gatherers. Several had swaddled babies on their backs. One had brought a donkey with an old fork-shaped cart for carrying wood. I needed to do this, to help in some way if I could. I knew this about myself. It was my nature. Adan came too because, she said, "I feel responsible for you now. I brought you here, didn't I?" Chapter 84. Years of wood foraging, moving farther and farther from the camp, had turned this into a long and scary walk. I used the time to talk with as many of the women as possible. Only one, it turned out, had any information about the missing boys, and possibly the tiger.
She says there is a hut in her sector,
Emmanuel told me.
3 boys were sharing it, but now they are gone.
I thought that wasn't unusual, I said.
Yes, except they left their things behind. She says a large man in fatigues was sighted in the camp. She was told he was the tiger.
Did any of the missing boys have parents in the camp? I asked. No parents. And did anyone see the boys leave? They left with the enormous man. After 2 hours of walking, we finally came to a long line of low, skeletal brush. The women spread gathering cloths on the ground and set to breaking down the brush. Adan and I pitched in while Emmanuel kept watch for Janjaweed patrols on the horizon. Without translation, we were mostly reduced to eye contact and gestures as we worked side by side with the gatherers. The women seemed oblivious to the scratches that appeared up and down their arms. They easily outpaced us newcomers and tried not to laugh at our clumsiness. One young mother and I fell into a kind of unspoken communication, making faces at each other like little kids. She stuck out her blue tattooed lip. I held up 2 sticks like antlers. That one got a real laugh out of her. She put her hand up to her mouth, not quite hiding a brilliant white smile. But then the mother stopped short. Her hand came down slowly as her eyes fixed on something in the distance. I turned around, but all I could see was a far-off dust cloud. And then Emmanuel started shouting for everyone to run.
Go quickly, now! Get out of here! Go back to camp!
Chapter 85. Janjaweed. I could see them now. Maybe a dozen armed killers were riding toward us on horseback. There was a vapor, a kind of mirage that made it hard to tell the exact number. Either way, their pace didn't leave much to the imagination. They were coming for us, fast. 2 of the women, one with a child fiercely holding on to her blouse, were still unhitching the communal donkey. "Get them out of here!" I shouted at Adan. "You go with them, please! Adan!" "Is there another weapon?" she yelled back.
No,
Emmanuel answered.
no, distance is your weapon right now. Go! For God's sake, go! Take them back to camp!
Emmanuel and I had to make a stand. We took up a position behind the abandoned donkey cart. I was using it as a brace for the rifle, more than as cover. Our best hope was that we were on the ground, while they would be firing from horseback. I could see them through my scope now. 11 killers, bearded males in baggy fatigues, waving Kalashnikov rifles, just coming into range. The first shots came from them. Sand kicked up on either side of us. They rode a little wide of the mark, but still too close. They weren't amateurs. They were already yelling threats at us, confident about the final result. Why not? They outnumbered us 11 to 2. "Now?" I finally said to Emmanuel.
Now!
We fired back 4 shots, and 2 were hits. The killers slumped on their horses, like someone had dropped their puppet strings,